Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today.
Welcome, Marc.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I hope you enjoyed this
I'm
episode of
doing
the
well.
Finding the
I'm glad to
Magic
be here.
podcast.
Well, thank you
I'm
for
your
being on the
host,
show. I'm
author
super
and podcaster
excited.
Tricia Copeland,
Your
and I love
title
getting
of your
behind the
newest
scenes.
release, Death at a
If you
Wedding.
like the
I liked a
podcast,
little
make
bit
sure to
of the
subscribe
blurb.
and stop in each
Set us
week
up for
to
what we're
discover new
expecting
authors
here.
and books.
Yeah,
Thanks
yeah,
for
I'd love
listening,
to. So,
and until
like you
next
said, my
time,
newest book is
keep
Death at a Wedding. It
finding
came out
the
in
magic.
April of this year. And it is an unexpected follow-up to what was my debut novel, Death Dresses Poorly. So I like to say that you don't have to have read Death Dresses Poorly to understand what's going on here. It's not a direct sequel. It's just the next part of the story. And in each of these books, the story mostly revolves around a young man named Ethan, who in the first book is tasked to become the new death because in this world death is cyclical, so it passes from person and or living creature, it doesn't have to be a person, from living creature to living creature as and when it's needed. And it's about the whole process of him trying to reconcile his past and try to avoid taking this route forward while death tries to uh, convince him in a very unconvincing way. But then Death at a Wedding follows up. It takes place years later, and I'm not spoiling anything in the first book to say that Ethan is now in the role and has been in it for quite some time. It's all about the journey, not the destination, which is why I say it doesn't spoil anything. And this time he has been invited to the wedding of the one person in the world that he cares about. And he needs to set aside being this multi-dimensional, omniscient specter of death to try and be a normal person, something he's never really done very well in his life. And along the way, he also meets a young woman that he could actually find himself having a future with. So now he has to kind of reconcile himself with that. So the first one I like to say is an urban fantasy dark comedy. There is a lot of sarcasm, a lot of very heady uh, and mature details that he has to go through. And then the newest one is an urban fantasy dark romantic comedy because it's definitely a romantic comedy, something I never really thought that I would write, but in the vein of the first book as well.
Fun. I just looked at the title and I didn't know anything else about you. And I was like, okay, well, it could be Death at a Wedding, could be a mystery crime thriller, or it went in a totally different way.
And that's something that I've gotten quite a lot, particularly back when it first launched. I was at the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo. I usually have a table there where I sell my books, and a lot of people as they're walking by, and the ones who don't know me, that take a look at it is like, "Oh, I love a good mystery book." I'm like, well,
Oh.
that's not what this is. But that was probably the most common, and I knew that that was going to happen when it came out. The kind of the play on words is the intention of the story in the first place. So I'm perfectly okay with that misinterpretation of the title.
Well, but as soon as you see the cover, you're like, oh, this is fantasy. This is not a crime
Yes.
thriller. So obviously the cover is on point. Nobody's gonna miss that one, I don't think.
No, no, and full credits to my publisher, Fluky Fiction, out of Maine. They did the covers for, at this point, actually, they've done the covers for all my books except for one, and I've never been, I've never been disappointed with anything that they've brought forward. I've never had to make a change. They present me an idea of what they're thinking after they go through it, and they said, "This is what we're going to do." I'm like, I love that, and I'm particular but I am also easy to please. So on the one side, I'm just like, this is just great. I'm just glad somebody wants to release something having to do with my book. But particularly with my Catching Hell series of my science fiction, epic science fantasy, actually, let's call it. Uh, I was very particular about one of those covers and how I wanted it designed, and then it came out and it was great. So yeah, for Death at a Wedding, they've absolutely nailed it.
Fun. How did you come up with this idea of the character of, and does he actually cause death or does he decide when people die? What are the particulars around that?
A great question. So I can say that I came up with the idea after a meeting that I personally had with a very enigmatic individual at O'Hare Airport in Chicago when I was about 19 or 20 years old. And the scene that I had with him, we ended up just having like a casual conversation while we were waiting for a flight and talking about like fast food and what's good and what's bad. And just about everything in the first chapter of the first book goes down as it went in that particular one. Some minor details are changed, but I'd say it's about 85% accurate. And that meeting always kind of sat with me because this gentleman was dressed top to bottom in perfectly matching black, which is not really something that you ever see. Like his socks, his shoes, the sport coat that he was wearing, everything was the exact same shade. But he was also like bleach blonde almost. Like he was incredibly pale, so it was very much contrast. And that just got me thinking about this particular world and how death would function if he was just a casual, strangely dressed individual. And that's why in the first one, Death dresses poorly. Death is always wearing black and it always matches, but he's always wearing a quirky outfit, if you will, like some things that don't necessarily go together. And I thought that that would be a really interesting character to try and flesh out. And as I started doing that, I realized that the character of Death, as I wanted to write it, wasn't someone who chooses when someone is going to die. They are someone who, I'm trying to remember the verbiage that I used, um, for lack of a better term, cleans up the aftermath. When somebody dies in this particular world, it's a very personal thing. And Death is always there to make sure that they die right. That's a phrase that I use a few times in the books where they are accepting of their death and they understand the what is about to happen. And then Death takes what for all intents and purposes is their soul and spreads it throughout the cosmos and makes sure that every little piece finds the spot where it's supposed to be. And I found that a lot more comforting than just someone who would have to be the entity who kills everyone, who decides when everyone dies. So in this world, it's just it, Death is more of the janitor than the executioner.
Well, and janitor is not a good phrase. I'm thinking they're a therapist slash social worker. Like that's a hard job.
It can be, and with this particular iteration, particularly in the second book, Death is trying to be more human. He's been in the role for a little while, and so there is a lot more instances where he is having conversations with people who are going through a hard time. Like I've written these as comedies. I've written these to try and get a laugh out of people, but there is serious things that are dealt with in this, serious things that I have been through myself, or people I know who have, or I just the people in the world in general have been through. And I think that having a death that is doing his best in his awkward, sarcastic millennial best is doing his best to try and comfort people at moments that are very, very hard.
Yeah, and that is much more comforting than the thought of like a Grim Reaper like character,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Like there's a lot of like jokes and misconceptions about what death is, and like there's a few references where characters are like, do you actually have a scythe? Do you ever use it? It's like, no, it's all just visualization. It's all just how humans have perceived this entity for so long, and how he tries to deal with that. But again, he's young, he's snarky, he has an attitude. He comes at these things incredibly aggressively, so he has no time for that kind of whimsy.
And I mean, does he have a normal lifespan?
Hmm.
Or that gives too
To
much
an
away?
to answer that, I think I might have to give too much away. That
Okay.
that would kind of give a little bit into the end. There is a unique way that he handles the situation in the first book that carries over to the second one that kind of ties to that. So I'll leave that one for now.
Okay. Yeah, because I think I'm gonna have to pick this up because I have a friend, and her and I both lost someone, and we've been talking more about like how do you like bring death as a normal thing, right? Like, and
Mhm.
that sounds like the what these books are definitely doing. It's making it just as, I mean, we know it's part of life, but
Mhm.
I don't think people like talk about it very comfortably.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. And I completely agree. And that's kind of where I came at this from. I've even like I've said it in I made a like a YouTube video about it not that long ago, discussing the fact that I feel as though for me personally, it's not something to be afraid of. Death and I are old friends. It's something that I've just been through, as I'm sure everybody has in their own certain way. But that is the way that I find it the easiest to deal with. And kind of writing a personification of that absolutely helped me.
yeah, yeah, and having that comedic part of it too sounds really, yeah.
It is self-insertion, I admit. I wrote it years after, like over a decade. I got started after that first initial meeting that I had in O'Hare, and I realized as I was writing that Ethan is very much me, how I would have reacted to things, how I would have spoken, how I would have just gone through the things that he goes through and how I would have dealt with them at that same time had I have done that. Now I didn't. He comes from a very difficult background. He comes from a place where his mother was a drug addict, was incredibly emotionally abusive, and he's just broken away from that. And I don't come from that. My mother raised me. I'd like to believe that she raised me right, and I love her to death. So I don't have that perspective. But when he is faced with something, he deals with them how I would deal with them. I am very snarky. I'm very sarcastic. I am abrasive to some, just in the way that I deal with these kinds of things. So yeah, it made it easier having him be a self-insert, particularly for writing the book, because I wrote the first one right after I was done spending about 5 years working on my Catching Hell duology. And I wrote the first Death book in 6 weeks because I
Oh,
needed to
wow.
do something so ridiculously different and so off the beaten path of what it was that I had been doing for the previous half decade that I just embraced it wholeheartedly and just dove right into it. And having a self insert made things a lot easier to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, you know how this character is going to react, right? You don't have to sit there and think about it very long.
No, no, not at all. And as a pure pantser writer, going by the seat of my pants while writing about myself, I'm the easiest possible task I could be given as a writer.
Fun. So it sounds like you have another series, Catching Hell, before you wrote this one.
I wrote it before. It takes place in the what I call the Ryujin world, so it is a futuristic yet also fantasy-based story. It takes place thousands of years in the future. It is magic meets machines. It is robots and dragons and phoenixes and lasers and all these kinds of things kind of combined, things that I loved really growing up with. And I started kind of writing in this world back in high school, and not these books in particular, but just kind of crafting this world and writing with pen and paper and creating stories in it. And then when I found myself at a job where I wasn't terribly mentally stimulated, it was a good job, and it's actually I'm still at that job. I'm just in a different role. I would steal away to empty cubicles because I work in an engineering company, and it's a cubicle farm in places. So I'd go to an empty one at lunchtime and I'd just sit down and I would just use that as my escape. And as I say, I ended up writing it for about 5 years. But then because of the way that this weird writing and publication system kind of works, I had submitted Catching Hell, at least part one, to be published, and I went through the usual rigmarole of querying and rejections and all the rest of that, and then it was finally picked up, and I was very thankful for it. And the publisher that picked me up at that time had a 8 month to 1 year publication window from the time of the contract signing, and in that time, I had also written Death Dresses Poorly, and I wanted to put that out, and I wanted to find a smaller, kind of more niche publisher. And I was lucky enough to find Fluky Fiction, who I mentioned before, and I liked what it was that they had done, and they were very small operation, very indie publisher, and their publication window was only about 4 to 6 months. So although Catching Hell was the first book I wrote and was the first one to get quote unquote picked up, Death Dresses Poorly was the first one to get published, so it is technically my first book in the world, or in the eyes of the world, of Mark Watson, the author. That's the first one.
Right. And did you have any formal training in writing, or this is just like crafting as you went?
Crafting as I went. And that was to get me started. So I'll preface this by saying I got better. I did start writing just because I wanted it to be a creative outlet. And if you take a look, I keep my first drafts, and if you take a look at my first draft of Catching Hell, the glaring errors cannot be ignored. But as time went on, and it looked more and more like I was going to publish it, and I wanted to become an actual writer. So, in order to do that, I realized that I kind of had to. I wasn't going to be able to coast on charm alone, right? I needed to be able to get this out there and do something more professional with it. So, on February 29th, 2016, so it was the leap day, I remember very, very clearly. And that was the day I decided to become a writer. And I made a list of things that I needed to do because I had the manuscript for Catching Hell. I hadn't written Death Dresses Poorly yet, but I had the manuscript. I knew that it was a story that I was proud of. And from what little beta reading I had, there was decent feedback. And then that's when I kind of made the list of these are the things that I need to do in order to take this a little bit more seriously. And one of those things was get an actual writing education, even if it's just a minor one, even if it's just basic classes, night classes or something like that, just to get a sense of it. I couldn't just float along anymore. So that's when I enrolled at Athabasca University, which is a university here in Alberta that primarily does online learning. And I took a number of classes through them and got a lot more education and learning about the finer things when it comes to writing. So that was one half of what was very important for trying to improve my writing, and the other half was also that was what was on that list that day. That was getting out to writing events, going to things like writers conferences and going to book readings and those kinds of things, and starting to learn more about the community and listening to what my immediate community had to say.
Right. Yeah. I feel like I was informally trained, well, in any type of writing, but I did technical writing. So that was like so different than
Yes.
yeah, obviously like it was very dry. So yeah, I went back afterwards and took courses on what is plot? How do you write a plot of a book, right?
Yeah, exactly. The you think when you're first starting to write, and I'm sure actually, because there's writers of all kinds, I'm sure some can just craft it right away. Maybe they'd have no training and they can just sit down and put fingers to keyboard and they can just figure it all out and they make the most amazing story ever. And I think those people are few and far between, but I do think that they exist. But there are these technical things and they are these specific things that 99% of writers out there just kind of have to know. And a lot of them aren't necessarily told to you when you're going through grade school and middle school and high school, or even a lot of post-secondary education. I think a lot of things do kind of start to lean more towards the technical writing and writing for being in a business and those kinds of things. And that's great. That teaches you some amazing skills, but it doesn't teach you how to write a story. And that is the biggest thing that we have to learn.
Yeah, the only thing I remember in high school was like 5 paragraphs essays and the research paper, right?
Yeah, there was very little creative writing for me. There was only a few instances I can think of where it was usually like a group project or something where we had to come up with something. And I was still a very adept writer at that time, and it was kind of known. So it's like, oh, well, Mark can do it. And I was just like, ugh, yeah, you're right. I can. Let me just go and write that. I, if on one hand, it's just like, well, they're just taking advantage of you, and then on the other hand, it's like, yeah, but I wrote some stories that I really, really enjoyed. Like I gather feedback from the group, and I'm like, okay, I'll put this together, and you guys put your stamp on it, and we'll be good. And yeah, I can definitely remember a few instances of that in high school for sure.
Fun. Well, what comes next? Is there another book for Ethan, or does that give away the second book?
It doesn't really because uh I have been saying for years, or at least I had been saying for years. So, Death Dresses Poorly came out in 2017. So I was very lucky that I was able to find a publisher who was able to put it out so quickly. And when I was doing conversations like this with people such as yourself, or with people in writers' conferences and those kinds of things, I swore up and down, I swore black, white, yellow, and green. It was a one and done story. There was only one story in Ethan. It was I had a story I wanted to tell. I wanted to get my head out of that catching hell space, and I wrote it. And as I said, I went to the Calgary Expo a bunch, and I would tell people walking by, because it's actually quite common for those that don't know that sometimes you'll go to expos and somebody will just come by and be like, I would like a singular story. Do you have something that's not in a series, or do you have something that I don't have to know all the lore to? And I'd be like, yes, I have this. It's only 45,000 words. It's very relatively short story. The first one is. The second one comes in at about 60,000. But I would say, yes, I have this. It's a nice little weekend read, beginning, middle, end. Nothing else will happen with these characters. And I said that for years. I've found records of it. And then I lied because I wrote another one. And I found myself in another situation that affected me very deeply, much like that first meeting did. And it had to do with death. And I realized there's might be another story in there. So the roundabout way of answering your question is I won't say no. I don't have a plan right now. I don't have another story for Ethan at this moment. Nothing is currently brewing. There's nothing in my work in progress folder. But the second story surprised me. The second story took me by surprise, that so much so that I had to write it. And for a longer book, I actually wrote it even faster than I wrote the first one because I was so engaged with this brand new idea that I had. I had to strike while the iron was hot. So never say never. Never say never.
It sounds like they're a little bit of a healing process for you.
And I've started to think that as well. Uh, I, it was the very beginning of this year. It was like right at the start. I lost a very close friend of mine, and a lot of the friends that we had were shared friends amongst us, and I was talking about these stories, and then they were like, well, we got to get your book too. Like, we got to try and read this. And a lot of the feedback that I've got from that is this really helped. This helped get through having us all having lost this good friend of ours. And I was very thankful to hear that. And then that's when I started to think, this is part of how I deal with these kinds of situations. This is part of how Mark Watson deals with death, is he writes about it and he makes a character. I believe that Ethan is much stronger than I could ever be by this point in his life. And being a self-insert, and but then also saying this character is stronger, well, that gives me the hope that I can be just as strong in those situations. So I definitely don't disagree with you.
Well, and in some of those situations, being weak is being strong, though, because actually, like being able to share what is going on with you or how deep this is affecting you sometimes takes more strength, I think, and courage than just like keeping going, pretending everything's okay, and then breaking down a year later, right?
Yes,
So.
yes, and I've been that person as well. I'm not going to say that I haven't. I'm very Canadian in that my lineage goes back many generations in this country, but before that, I'm very, very British, and the Britishisms come up every once in a while when it's just, well, power through. Let us just move on. Like, keep calm and carry on, the stiff upper lip and all that, and you just don't show your emotions. They're in there. It's a genetic trait of mine. So I suppose that this is a one way that I try and fight against that, to rage against that, because I don't necessarily think it's right. I'm a very emotional person. I have admitted from the very beginning, for anybody who will meet me, I am a crier. It doesn't take much to really try and get to me. I'm not like an absolute ball weeping I'm not quite that far, but it doesn't take too much effort to bring a tear to my eye, and I feel the need to own that as a man who is a father of two boys, just to show that those kinds of emotions are good and they're healthy, and do not pack them away because they will eat you alive if you're not careful.
Definitely. Well, and it sounds like you really balanced that out though with the comedy aspect in the book.
Well, that's how I deal with things, and I've said it before. I've never been to a funeral I couldn't tell a joke at. Like even like I did the eulogy at my grandmother's funeral, and the majority of the eulogy was just me leading up to a punchline, just so I could take that moment of gravitas and then I could hit with the punchline at the right time. And the crowd kind of gives a collective sigh, like it's okay, it's good to laugh. We can feel levity at a moment of sadness. And those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. So yeah, it is a coping mechanism, but it is also just kind of something I've always been kind of naturally good at. I like to think that I'm pretty quick with a comeback. Maybe it's all my time spent in pro sports. I've learned, or amateur sports, I should say, where I've been pretty good with a like a witty comeback. Well, with the other coaches or playing baseball or something like that. Like I've got my chirp game pretty much on lock at this point. So yeah, it's just it's part of my personality, and I wanted to make sure that that came through in Ethan.
Fun. Well, are you writing anything new?
I am an incredibly mercurial writer in that I run very hot and very cold sometimes. So for the last few months, particularly since the launch in April, I haven't actually written anything. Not a single thing other than one short story. And I do have a work in progress, a completed work in progress. That is a pure science fiction, has nothing to do with any of my other worlds. It is just a where I was at the time. I really wanted to tell like a very much more grounded science fiction story with touches of adventure. It's kind of what a I'm very much inspired by things like The Orville, which is like one of my favorite science fiction shows, where there is a little bit of levity, but it is still essentially like a Star Trek The Next Generation Monster of the Week kind of parody. So I wanted to write something like that. So I am sitting on that, and then as soon as I get that bug to go back and work on it again, I'll pull it out and go through another round of editing, and then I'll float it out there into the world and see if there's any bites.
Well, fun. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I loved hearing about your book. I'm gonna definitely pick it up. Death at a Wedding. I might have to pick up the first one too, because and the covers are just, I mean, I don't know if you have the cover, but they're black. Black is my favorite color, in case you can't tell by what I have on. So, somebody who wears like black, all of the same shade would be like, I would have to talk to them too. Did you get to ask him why?
I didn't. It was actually a very unique situation because I was just sitting there. I had my headphones on. I was listening to my Walkman at the time, or Discman. I can't really remember which one. Something that makes me old. And I didn't even notice the fact that he came and he sat down next to me. And there was an interaction with somebody else who was nearby, and it was then that I kind of noticed him, and he was just very engaging, and he was very charming, very very charismatic. And of course, cynical Mark is always like, "What's the scam? What's he about to sell me? What is? Are you about to try and save me? Are you about to try and sell me something? What's the deal?" And no, he was just casually having a conversation. He's like, "Oh, well, we all just wait around in here. We might as well just talk to one another." And I was just like, "No, that's something that I mean that particular thing happened 1999, 2000. So." A lot of things have changed since then. Now we're a lot more standoffish, I think, than we kind of were at that time. So it was just a refreshing meeting. It was just something very different. But it was the fact that he was dressed in all this matching black that kind of caught my eye at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, thank you for being here. Tell everyone where we can find your books.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. You can find my books. They're all available on Amazon, all 5 of them. So that is Death Dresses Poorly and Death at a Wedding. Then there's Catching Hell Part 1 Journey, Catching Hell Part 2 Destination, and Between Conversations Tales from the World of Ryujin, which is my only self-published book. And they are, as I said, they're all available on Amazon. You can also find me at my website, which is Mark Watson at markwatson.ca. So that's MarcWatson.ca, not .com. .com is owned by another Mark Watson author who's a really cool guy, but that's not me. And then you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Mark Wrote a Book, all one word. And then you can find me on literally every other social media site at Wright Watson, WRITEWATSON.
Fun. You have some very good handles there. I guess I found your your correct website right away. So you were ranking higher than the other Mark Watson, maybe.
That's okay. He hasn't written very much in quite some time. He has quite possibly the world's most interesting job to me. I believe he's retired now, but he is the head thrill ride engineer for Universal Studios Orlando. So his job is a lot cooler sounding than mine. So he's very much busy doing that, and then he kind of writes on the side, much like I do. But my regular day job is not Universal Studios chief ride engineer. So
that is that thrill ride engineer. That's a cool job. So yes,
that's a pretty cool job. He designed my favorite roller coaster in the entire world, and when I first found out what he did, I had to tell him that. So that was just very unique kismet that he happens to be that guy.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, we hope you'll come back when you publish your next book. So let us know. And thank you again. And we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I look forward to it.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.